Hello and welcome to the Inner Sense channel. Today we are lucky to be joined by Dr. Parker Kelley, a translational neuroscientist who's just finished his postdoc, and he's based in California. He's very much interested in how stress reshapes brain-body function, and his work bridges trauma and PTSD research with emerging fields such as psychoneuroimmunology and mitochondrial psychobiology. Today, amongst other things, we'll be discussing a recent paper that Parker was lead author on called the Allostatic Triage model of psychopathology. And it presents a really interesting framework that appeals to me about how stress can drive resource allocation and to perhaps lead to many different psychiatric symptoms. So part of this model includes something that's very central to this channel, which is how we interpret signals from our body. That's interoceptive signals. And as you will know, if you follow this channel, we're very much interested in the felt experience of bodily sensations and what meaning we may or may not draw from them. So please remember to subscribe to the Inner Sense channel for more information about inner body awareness and tips to improve your well-being. Welcome, Dr. Kelley.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Excited to jump in.
So let's start with the story about how you arrived here. You've got a background in molecular neuroscience and trauma and PhD research. And what were the kind of twists and turns in your training that led you to develop this model with the abbreviation, the ATP model?
Yeah, great question. I do need to start by saying that nothing I say in this podcast should be considered medical advice, or and none of it represents the opinion of any of my past or present institutions, including the VA, UCSF, LSU, or Columbia. So yeah, just got to start out with that. And now, to jump in, I mean, I definitely had an interesting academic path. I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I started college. Ended up getting a philosophy degree, focused mostly on philosophy of mind, because I was fascinated by the mind and consciousness and these sorts of things. But eventually realized, there's limits to what I can speculate about. I need some experimental background, and so I ended up getting a dual degree in psychology as well. But yeah, even as I approached the finish line there, wasn't really sure what I was going to do with that education, and eventually joined a nutritional neuroscience lab, and focused on molecular biology. It was really beyond my expertise, but I was really encouraged by the PI to kind of dig in. And it really kind of satisfied my increasing desire to understand mechanisms and what's going on, and to kind of satisfy some of those itches that I had from philosophy of mind. And during that period, I studied nutritional neuroscience and especially calorie restriction animal models with relevance to movement disorders like Parkinson's, and that's where I really got excited about molecular biology. And it kind of culminated in right around that time. I had a conversation with my now wife, then friend, with one of my professors, and she was really interested in this idea of energy and how to translate our subjective sensations of energy and our affective experiences and into the language of science. And when she used that term, I mean, it was like that. Like, our professor was like, wait, what do you mean by that? Because it sounds kind of hand wavy, and he really pushed back, and he wanted us to give some kind of specific answer. We didn't have an answer to the question, and so we kind of left his office a little unsettled, being like, there's this very intuitive thing that she meant by this, and that I was trying to wrap my head around, but we just didn't know how to talk about it. And as I was looking for graduate programs, I was interested in PTSD, and I'd also started to become interested in psychedelic drugs, particularly ayahuasca, because I had I had some close friends and family members who had been, really struggled with some psychiatric disorders, particularly substance use disorders that they just really couldn't get treatment for in the States or in the West, really. tried multiple things, and it went and did ayahuasca, and it was like game changer, enormous change. And so I got the opportunity to be able to study ayahuasca and DMT in a post-traumatic stress disorder model, which was great because it allowed me to kind of understand molecular neurobiology of stress and then also use a therapeutic. And so I ended up going to that lab to collaborate between multiple PIs to study this. And what really jumped out when we started doing RNA sequencing in the brain of these animal models of traumatic stress was mitochondrial genes. And also on the functional outcomes we were looking at, we were seeing increased reactive oxygen species production in the brain, and the lab had previously shown it in the periphery. And I used multiple models. We found like a lot of it was undeniable. Especially when we used untargeted techniques, we saw all of these mitochondrial energetic related processes, not just mitochondria, but systemic things like insulin signaling, insulin-like growth factor signaling, and it just we did this multiple times, multiple different models and angles, and we just kept seeing it, and that's really what I just couldn't overlook it, right? And as I kind of dove into my PhD, it just it kept coming. And so that eventually became my dissertation work, was looking at allostatic load associated factors in animal models of PTSD, and then also looking at the way that psychedelics may alter some of those systems that get dysregulated in stress. And so, when I went to look for postdocs, I got an opportunity to continue studying psychedelics and ayahuasca, but in humans instead of preclinical models. Thankfully, my wonderful PI at the time, Josh Woolley, who was invited me to come do the postdoc, his wife, Aoife O'Donovan, who eventually became my main PI during my postdoc, she was studying psychoneuroimmunology, and I was really interested in the kind of immunological implications on these metabolic effects. And she was studying psychoneuroimmunology and PTSD. So I got into this great postdoc situation where I got to continue studying both of my passions through a kind of energetic and molecular lens. And so that really got me on the track that I am now. Eventually I went to the a conference in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and met Martin Picard, and he became another great mentor of mine. And that's actually where I am now. Just finished my postdoc, and I'm moving to a research scientist position with Martin.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. I think we'll probably loop around quite a bit in this conversation and return to some of those things you've mentioned. And but first of all, I want to ask you a few kind of maybe personal questions. So often researchers and scientists are encouraged to kind of really specialize early on and focus on one thing and sort of drill down and become an ultra specialist in one topic. Whereas you started in philosophy of mind and you've kind of gone over to microbial work. And would you say there are any benefits to that route, working in a kind of cross-disciplinary way that's allowed you to look at things differently?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was really the only path for me in science. Just personally, based on the way that I think and engage with the world. I mean, I think that there's a tremendous value to specializing, and I got that advice over and over again from colleagues and mentors throughout my PhD and even before that. But it just never really rang true for me. I always felt, especially having this interdisciplinary perspective, I always felt like the important thing was that we have all these different kind of segregated sets of data, these different conceptual frameworks to think about the world, but they weren't communicating, right? Mm-hmm. Like and what they really weren't communicating with, even psychology, which is kind of the closest, what was to our kind of intuitive experience and our phenomenological experience that I studied in philosophy of mind. And so it just really it appealed to me so much, and I guess I had I kind of have an itch for parsimony and for comprehensive kind of models of things. And so that was really like my particular path and where I felt like my my particular brain could help push things forward. And so I think that I think that's where the sauce is, really. I think we still need specialists, of course, but I think we have enough information about the way that biology and the mind works now. Like we of course still need new experiments, but I think we have a lot of work to do in integrating that information. So yeah.
I would agree with you wholeheartedly on that. And yes, so I've had that similar itch to want to kind of help translate between disciplines, and even the word energy that you mentioned can mean so many different things to different people. And we'll probably move on in a minute to defining some terms or what you mean by energy and stress and so on. But my partner as well often talks about energy, and she's a therapist. I'm a therapist part-time as well as lecturer and researcher. So without worrying about definitions, have you got any personal practices that you use to protect your own energy budget day to day to help you stay vital? I understand you've got a toddler and you're moving house and moving career, so that's very energy demanding and unpredictable. How do you cope with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yes, I have lots of practices, and no, I'm not always good at doing them because of we've got a 2-year-old, so it's been really tough to adjust and kind of carry over my practices into this uncertain context. But I guess I would kind of divide the things that I do as much as possible into a couple categories. The first one is kind of taking care of my head. I spent a long time practicing mindfulness. Where I went to undergraduate in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, there was a Zen temple, Vietnamese Zen temple. So I learned to practice there. That's been really helpful. Also walks in nature. I mean, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, so that's abundant here. And that's really helpful. But yeah, I think all kinds of things, connection with family, friends, support systems, like, making sure that I focus on that. Making time to connect to my wife and partner is really crucial. And then also, I think psychotherapy is also really important, and other forms of that. And I think the last thing in that category would be forms of release, like dancing. I really like to see live music, and I'm from the kind of New Orleans area, and if you know anything about New Orleans, that's it's the big music city, and so things like that, ecstatic experiences, I think, are also really important in all their different forms. And then of course, take care of my body. I think exercise is really important. I do a lot of running, endurance exercise, but I think strength training is also really crucial. And then more kind of flowy or kind of engaging activities, climbing, and I practice a little jujitsu as well. And then diet, I think, we could talk about this in more detail, but I think that they're kind of, I did some work on blueberries, like looking at how polyphenol-rich foods can improve psychiatric symptoms. We just published a paper, actually, with my wife as first author, maintaining blood sugar levels, gut health, those sorts of things. And also, I think there's some supplements that can be helpful, maybe creatine and fish oils and things like that to help kind of maintain a healthy state. And then, I think the last thing that I wanted to mention is more focused on the kind of energy regulation. I think that, evolutionarily, we spent a lot of time in more boom and bust cycles. We went periods where we were hungry, not necessarily starving, but I think, we tend to spike our blood sugar a lot in the modern day. And I think that is fine sometimes, as long as it's balanced with periods of lower blood sugar, so that your body can get kind of optimized to use fats and ketones and other things. It helps normalize things. So I think that not spiking too much, and also having periods where of fasting, even if it's just not eating so close to bedtime and things like that, is important. Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
Wow.
thank you.
You've really laid out there, I think, in my opinion, again, this isn't, just my opinion, a kind of ecology or toolbox of things that people could draw upon. And I think as we learn that there's not really one magic bullet to maintaining health. There's this whole set of things, lifestyle things, and more modern interventions that can be useful. Something that's just come to mind as I was hearing you there, this sort of cyclical nature of maybe food in our past, or cycles of having plenty and then not so much following the seasons and so on. And we'll probably come on to this later, but this tension between predictability and change. What's coming to mind is the term hormesis. I don't know if you've come across that, but this stress of a sudden change, but then it's short-lived and it helps people adapt to change in the future. And I think maybe what you're sort of hinting at, this periods of ketosis might be good in that it helps us tolerate future stress, or makes us more adaptable, metabolically adaptable. But yes, let's move on to the definitions first. So maybe just some short definitions just to help set the scene, and then we can maybe return to them later. So stress is central to the allostatic triage model that you're presenting in your paper. So what does stress mean to you in this paper?
Yeah, it's a really important fundamental question. So I think it's important to differentiate between a stress, which is an either exogenous or environmentally driven thing that experience or stimulus that increases energy demand on our bodies, and they can also be internally driven. You can have kind of internally driven stressors like anxiety. And the stress response, which is the response of our body to those stimuli. And the way that we define the stress response, there are lots of definitions out there, is that it is an energetic response that helps organisms manage the increased demand associated with the stressor, right? And so the way we define stress is not equivalent to the stress response. So you have the stress response when you and I'm talking, the HPA axis, releases cortisol and adrenaline and things like that. That happens when we wake up in the morning. It happens during dancing and sex and exercise and all kind of things that we wouldn't really consider stressful, things that are beneficial, ecstatic experiences, flow states, things like that. So we do not consider those things stress, right? Stress response is activated, but the idea there is that the stress response is providing enough energy to engage in those activities. So stress is defined, at least in our terminology, when the stress response is not adequate to provide enough energy to meet the stressor-induced demand. And there's a little qualifier there that a lot of this is predictive, like you said. So yeah, we can dig into those details later. I don't want to dive in too deep right now. So yeah.
Yeah. So you're distinguishing between how we react to changes or perceive changes, and then the actual the stressor itself. Okay, good. And energy, a word we all use. How do you think about it in this paper?
Yeah, so the way we think about it in the paper, and it's really lined up with the goals of the paper. We really wanted to kind of create or derive or whatever terminology is optimal here, a kind of fundamental principle that can kind of shape the way that we understand biology. So we wanted to tie the word energy to its definition in physics and material sciences and things like that. And so what we mean by energy is the energy that comes down from the sun or from the earth. It's used by plants to create carbohydrates, and where does that energy go? It goes into the chemical bonds in the carbohydrates or in fats or in proteins that we eat. So it's that physical energy is what we mean, and yeah, that energy is liberated through oxygen in our mitochondria or through glycolysis. So we really do mean the same energy of physics. And the other definition that is also relevant to this paper is the subjective feeling of energy, which is what I mentioned earlier, talking to my professor in undergraduate. So a lot of the work in this paper and in my future work with Martin is focused on trying to understand how that subjective experience of energy is related to actual physical energy states of our body. And just one more qualifier is that it's not a fixed thing, right? Energy is constantly being transformed. So it's the rate of energy being produced relative to the rate of energy that we're using. And another quick qualifier is that this energy is not just like if you have a lot of like you're heavy, right? You have a lot of fat on your body. You have a lot of potential energy there in the form of
Mm-hmm.
fat. So, but that rate of your body to transform that energy into something that you can use right now, that's
Mm.
the key point, right? So having a lot of energy in your storage sometimes it can be the opposite. It can make you less energetically efficient. So it's how much energy can you access now? That's what we're
Mm.
talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, which links back to the idea of metabolic flexibility.
That's right.
Yes, so yeah, it's hard. It is hard to kind of summarize these things very simply, isn't it? And even in physics, well, you'd think physics could be very precise about it, but a lot of physics is talking about potential energy. Energy. If you raise a ball up high, then it's got more potential energy than when it's raised down low in relation to the gravity of pull of the Earth. So, but the balls stay the same. So yeah, we could go down rabbit holes just talking about even sort of physics definitions of energy. But I like there, your concept of flux and change and move. There's a movement specialist called Ido Portal. I don't know if you've heard of him. Israeli movement specialist, and he's very sort of philosophical. And so energy can be thought of, of movement or rate of change. But he prefers the word these days, motion. Or potential for motion. So yeah, sometimes we get trapped with a particular word, don't we? And it's good to kind of expand and play with these words sometimes. Okay, so that's energy. We've talked about stress. We talked about energy, and then something which may not be so familiar with people. It's a term that's come about in the last 10 years or so. Allostasis. So homeostasis, people will be more familiar with this idea of returning to a settling range or a set point, like 37 degrees C for body temperature or blood glucose within a certain range. But allostasis develops that with a kind of predictive aspect. What can we say about allostasis? What's your definition?
Yeah, so the contrast to homeostasis is really important. I think that was first done at 86 or 87 by Peter Sterling, who's the wonderful thinker. So homeostasis is altering physiology to maintain a set point, right? So like you said, temperature, blood pH, those sorts of things. And these are usually for physiological things that can change, but changing them, directly reduces function. So our cells are optimized for 37-degree centigrade. If that's not the case, then all the molecular mechanisms don't work as well. Where allostasis is a different thing. It's altering the set points to maintain physiological or metabolic balance, right? So instead of altering physiology to maintain set points, homeostasis, allostasis is altering those set points themselves to maintain physiology. And these are usually for systems that are a little bit more flexible. So the amount of glucocorticoids you release when you're exposed to stress, and a lot of other, how much energy you're making per unit of time in a particular, context and relationship to a particular stimulus. These things are, again, moving them too far can alter function, but it's not as direct as like, if you have 105-degree fever, like you're not going to live very long, right? It's not so rigid, right? So allostasis is altering these set points, and so you may hear allostatic dysregulation or allostatic load. These things are when those set points shift so much that it's causing it is deleteriously impacting physiology. But the important thing is that often our body needs to go into these allostatic states in order to maintain survival, right? So during stress, it's okay it's actually beneficial. We need to move into these particular allostatic states to be able to maintain survival during stress. But when those states persist, they become pathological, and that's
Yeah.
when allostasis moves to allostatic load and things like that.
Uh, uh, yeah. So I guess it's the way that we look at these things depends on the time scale or the snapshot that we're taking. So yeah, when someone's
Yeah,
got a fever, then that
yeah,
body temperature set point will go up for a while. But if you looked and you might say that the body's then regulating itself in a different set point. But if you looked, over the course of a year when they're mostly healthy, then you wouldn't even notice that
mm,
fluctuation really so much. Okay, um, super. So now another definition or term that was in your paper that is maybe more closely related to this channel and the experience of bodily sensation. So the word affect. What's your views on affect, and how close or how different is it to the more common word emotion?
Yeah, great question. So I'm not an effective neuroscientist. You've studied a little bit of this stuff in psychology, but this is I do get a little bit ahead of my skis here sometimes, and so because of that, I tend to follow particular thinkers in this area. And so one like wonderful investigator, Lisa Feldman Barrett, who I've interacted with a little bit at meetings and stuff like that. She has this wonderful model of affect in which it really just has two axes, right? Just so XY plane, and those two axes are intensity and valence. So positive and negative, and how intense it is, right? And the way she thinks about affect is it is an kind of endogenously generated internal model of our kind of subjective energy states. And so when your body's, it's also predictive. So your body's predicting based on information traveling to the brain from the vagus nerve and other peripheral processes. If those signals are saying, hey, we have a huge energy demand and we're not producing enough energy to meet that demand, she would suggest that this may drive a kind of depressive like state, and that depressive behavioral state is for the purpose of saving energy, right? So if you rest for a while, then that energy budget can come back into balance, and that may be the evolutionary purpose of affective states. Whereas when you're in a very positive state, your body's predicting it has plenty of energy to do whatever you need to do, and so it liberates that subjective kind of sensation of energy. And Lisa has a great model that is I think it's emerging as a dominant, if not the dominant model of emotion. And qualify that. I'm not an expert here, but I think that's the case. And that's the idea. It's the constructed theory of emotion. So Lisa found that when you look cross-culturally, emotions and their association with faces don't always line up with our Western expectations. Mm-hmm. And so she wasn't really able to find neurophysiological correlates of different emotional states, right, that were consistent cross-culturally. And so what she predicted is that animals and all organisms, or most organisms at least, have affective states, but as you move into higher organisms, cultural and interpretive contextual components kind of come into play, and your body generates emotional states as interpretations of those affective states. So for instance, you feel a certain way in your body, and you're in one situation you may say I'm excited, right? And then in another situation you may say I'm anxious, but the sensation in your body may be very similar. And it's the associations and the context that you apply to those sensations that explain them to yourself and to other people. So emotions are these socio-culturally constructed explanations are of why you feel a particular way within her model, of course. Yeah.
Yes,
I think that model was correct, but we'll see.
Yeah, I'm biased towards that as well, and I wrote a sort of pop science lifestyle book in 2017, or it was released a few years later, but and I drew heavily upon her work, and I when it was researching for it, I discovered that sort of framework that you talked about with the two axis, and it helped me be able to distinguish between those that's just the way of looking at it more objectively, which is, okay, I'm feeling activated or calm, it's pleasant or unpleasant as the XY axis, compared to, okay, what story am I going to tell about that state, and what label am I going to give it? As you said, is it angry? Is it excited, and so on? So there's a very interesting. I don't know if you follow Michael Levin, but Michael Levin and Lisa Feldman Barrett and her colleagues were had a very interesting discussion a week or so ago on I can't remember whose channel it was, but okay, it seems like we're following similar frameworks.
Yeah.
So your model, ATP model, how does it build on that? I know that the focus is on psychiatric effects. So please introduce the ATP model.
So it's it is focused on psychiatric disease, although one of the jumping off points was why are psychiatric disorders kind of bidirectionally associated with physiological dysregulation. So, for instance, having major depression increases your chances of developing a cardiovascular disorder and vice versa. And that's the case with inflammatory disorders. And there seems to be some kind of shared variance between a lot of these different conditions, that, especially conditions that are associated with stress. And so we're wondering, like, why is this the case? And based on our definition of stress, the way we've defined it fundamentally indicates some level of resource scarcity, right? It could be at a particular cluster of cells or tissues, or systemically. But the idea is that in that context, when energy is scarce, or you don't have enough energy to like supply all of your energy needs, you're not able to transform it fast enough for the amount of demand that you have. What happens in biological systems? And Martin Picard had this great model he published a couple of years ago called the energetic model of allostatic load, where he looked at this at the email model, in which he looked at this at the kind of cellular level based on some in vitro experiments and some in vivo experiments in animals. And they basically showed that, like, when energy is scarce, you have to triage, or he didn't use that terminology, that's something I introduced, but you have to triage that energy between different kind of molecular systems in cells and tissues. And so what we did is we applied that to the brain, and we, it turns out that the brain has less access to energetic resources than most, or maybe all of the tissues in the body. I mean, the brain is 3% of body weight, but it uses 20 to 25% of the glucose and oxygen in the body. So it's really using a ton of energy relative to how much it weighs. And also the brain has less capillary density, per micrometer, or whatever the metric is. And so it's using a lot. It doesn't have a lot of access. So I was like, well, this email model, like it would apply like even more extremely to the brain. And so that kind of brought us to the idea of allostatic triage, right? So as applied to the CNS. So when the CNS has limited energetic resources relative to all the processing and things that it wants to do, the idea is that it has to pick, it has to decide, which processes are most important for survival. It's not always actually survival. Sometimes it's going on a podcast, or public speaking, or having an argument with your spouse, or whatever. But it triggers these same kind of survival, circuits that were developed, over evolutionary time. And so we looked at the, different cost of brain network activation, which we were able to find in a couple different papers. And turns out that higher order kind of prefrontal, more evolutionarily adapted or evolved, especially more phylogenetically recent, developed networks are more metabolically expensive. And so we proposed that when the brain's under energetic stress, where's the most energy is the expensive areas. So energy is triaged from those expensive areas to less evolutionarily expanded kind of survival processes. So that's kind of the fundamental idea. And then the idea is that, over time, with chronic stress, extreme stress, other, things that would drive PTSD or MDD or other psychiatric disorders, or peripheral, cardiovascular, cardiometabolic disorders, they dysregulate metabolism, and it kind of exacerbates the situation. When you have less efficient metabolism, then you're going to need to triage energy more. And so we kind of developed this idea that it's a progressive process, that over time, as metabolism becomes less efficient, your body's less efficient at managing allostasis, you need to do more triage. And so it's kind of a positive feedback loop that drives disease.
Yeah. So people can get stuck in a kind of state of shutting down some networks that give them more freedom to think in different ways, and they're relying on the less energy demanding networks. Reminds me a little bit of the, just as you're saying this about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's the fundamental needs might be something like water, shelter, somewhere to sleep, but then his hierarchy went up, and then it was self-actualization at the top. So if I'm understanding you correctly, when there's a stress that's demanding lots of energy, the brain networks that allow us to do these kind of more creative thinking or types of processing that demand more energy, they shut down, and we allocate resources to the survival or the more basic functions.
Yep, I think there's like one qualifier there is that the evidence for these higher order brain networks shutting down is not, it's not so straightforward. It's more that we see changes to those networks, and it may even be, you know, within those networks there's this but within those networks there are changes. So it's not that they totally shut down. You don't see like hypofrontality in these states, but it's that some of the energy from some of the processes they are managing are shifting, and we're proposing that you know, reduces things like executive control, and maybe impairs things like self-referential processing mediated by the default mode network, or alternatively, if self-referential processing is perceived to be necessary for survival, then maybe those networks get enhanced at the cost of other things. But the insight we had is that you know, this calculation takes into consideration the cost of network activation.
So yeah, not necessarily shut down, but maybe it's more like an analog, a dial rather than a switch on and off.
That's right. Yeah.
And I can see how this model, as you said, you focused on the brain, but I could see how it could be applied elsewhere in the body. And, you know, people might be familiar with the idea of rest and digest, and fight and flight, and or, you know, athletes, Olympic athletes who, when they're training intensely, you know, their hormone profiles might change, or a female might stop menstruating if she's doing intense physical training. So the body is constantly allocating between networks and systems, and dialing them up or down depending on the need. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Okay. I key just to summarize all that, I think you get what you optimize for, right? And whether or not that optimization driver is the environment or your own internal, you know, like in the case of athletes, like they're pushing themselves to do this, but just whatever the organism is optimizing for, I think that's, you know, that's where energy flows.
Get what you optimize for, and for better or for worse, I guess, when it comes, if we're looking at pathology, it might be a great outcome, or it might start off being a great outcome, but then be detrimental in the long term.
Yep.
So in your introduction, you mentioned about mitochondria was showing up in some of the research you were doing, and one of the terms in your paper was mitochondrial information processing system, which my ears pricked up when I read that. So what's that all about?
Yeah, it's so okay. So when I started getting interested in mitochondria, it blew my mind, because I mean, you know, we learned about how mitochondria, you know, were, you know, incorporated into eukaryotic cells for the first time in biology, and it's called the endosymbiosis hypothesis. So a cell kind of ate this energy producing other type of cell, and they're like, oh wow, we can use this energy, right? And that's the beginning of eukaryotic cellular evolution. But it's, when I started reading about mitochondria, it started to flip. And, you know, maybe it wasn't the case that some big cell got a battery, but that this mitochondria got a vehicle. You know, it's mitochondria actually process a tremendous amount of information. While this, you know, analogy is not perfect, it may be the case that mitochondria are kind of the central information processor of the cell, or networks of mitochondria, where the nucleus is kind of a library. It's a storage of information, right? I've always thought about the nucleus of the cell as the information processor, but it does seem like a lot of the processing goes on in this mitochondrial information processing system. So you have thousands of mitochondria all throughout your cell, and they're all communicating and linked together, and they can actually fuse and break apart, and they actually move around within the cell. So if you have a neuron, you know, growing a new synapse, mitochondria have to move to those synapses to supply energy. And it's not only, this is the part that really blew my mind. It's not only that they do that within cells, but it's turning out that research is showing that mitochondria may actually be able to leave a cell. So you may have a mitochondria leaving like a platelet, for instance, and going into another cell that's stressed out, that needs more energy. So mitochondria, they're probably the only organelle that is not you know, attached to their host cell indefinitely. Mitochondria are actually kind of doing their own thing. And in mitochondria, they produce a lot of the key enzymatic steps of glucocorticoid synthesis in the adrenal glands. So you have mitochondria synthesizing glucocorticoids in the adrenal glands, and they're called glucocorticoids for a reason because they increase glucose in the bloodstream, they increase energy availability. And glucocorticoids are lipid soluble, so they go to all the cells of the body. So you have, mitochondria in the adrenal glands communicating through glucocorticoids to mitochondria in the brain. And so when the glucocorticoids get into a neuron, they go to the nucleus to code for certain genes, but they also go to the mitochondria, those two places. So you have this, systemic mitochondrial information processing system that's and the MIPS, as it's termed, can actually helps manage cellular and systemic allostasis. So it's we have a brain, we have this distributed information processing network that's energetically focused in the mitochondria as well, and they interact.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Wow, that is mind-blowing and kind of humbling to think we've got so much more to learn. It's making me think of the fungal networks between trees as well, the role of the mitochondria. And I'm also thinking, I need to keep my mitochondria happy. If they can leave, they might just leave my body completely. So long, and thanks for all the fish. If you've seen Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Wonderful.
So, fine. So, yes, so that mitochondria are a big focus of your work, and you mentioned Martin Picard. So I first heard about his work speaking to Caroline Williams, who's a science writer. She wrote an incredible book called about interoception called In a Sense, which is the same title as this channel. And I think I looked up his work after speaking to Caroline, and now every time I go onto LinkedIn, I just see all these papers, and that may have been how I found this paper. I'm not sure. So you're going to work with in Martin Picard's lab with him, and it seems that that this move towards bringing back energy and bringing back the role of mitochondria. It's a little bit of a movement that I'm seeing amongst the biology world. Obviously, I could just be in a bit of an echo chamber. But what do you hope? How do you hope that the vocabulary of how we talk about where computation is based and where all of this kind of distributed network, who's in charge? Is it just the brain, or is it, are the mitochondria having their fair say in our health? What's your thought? How would you like it to evolve, or where do you think it's going?
So, I mean, I do think there's a bit of an echo chamber effect to the not everybody I talk to in biology is on this mitochondrial train, but I think more and more people every day, and now when I give talks and stuff about it, people are like, yes, we're starting to get really cool feedback. So I do think that it's kind of emerging as a kind of viable alternative perspective. But I think that the real thing that it does that's really profound is that it gives us a more organizing principle. I think that what we have now is we have people who study cardiometabolic disease, and they look at the mechanisms, and even people that study kind of transdiagnostic disease, they look at mechanisms and things like the general psychopathology factor and these sorts of things. But still, it's all kind of disconnected. And I think that when we start to take Martin's work and Lisa's work and these other perspectives and integrate that, we're seeing this kind of common thread of allostasis and kind of energetic drivers of function and behavior, right? And it makes sense because anything that happens in biology requires energy, right? And so I think that we've gone a long way down this kind of molecular mechanistic rabbit hole, and I think that gives us the kind of tools and the landscape. But what we need is this organizing principles that tell us like what's going on here, because it's so easy to get caught up in all the noise and focus on individual mechanisms. And so what I'm hoping and what I think is happening is that is that we're kind of drilling down to these things, and it may be that it's not like this, and we're missing something, and that they're, that this energetic perspective is not as crucial as we think it is. But what I'm hoping happens is not that any of these past models are molecular understandings of how physiology and disease works. Not that any of those things will be disproven, but they'll be integrated together into a kind of more seamless or comprehensive understanding of health and disease, and how we can treat these kind of energetic related endpoints or biomarkers and subjective surveys and sensations as signals for how the body is processing energy and how flexible it is with its ability to produce and distribute that energy and stuff like that. So I'm hoping that it may not be that we throw out SSRIs and these other tools that we have, but that we deepen our understanding of how to use them in practice in tandem with therapy and nutrition and other sort of the things I mentioned before. So that's what I hope is going to be the case. But we will see. I think we proposed a lot of hypotheses or predictions at the end of the paper that really need to be experimentally validated before we can really say that this is the way that things are. But regardless, I think it's important that we put these things out there, because then people will test them. It's always gonna lead us to deeper and deeper truths about things, whether we're correct or not. So
So are there any things that you, with your new move to a new lab, you're on top of your list? Any kind of projects or programs that where you'll be testing some of these things?
So Martin has a lot of data and a lot of ongoing human experiments and also preclinical experiments that I'm going to be focusing on kind of analyzing or working with teams to analyze, and my focus for some of that stuff will be trying to see how existing data sets from Martin's lab and others shed light on the validity of this ATP model, and then also kind of developing new experiments to test it specifically. And then the other that's going to be one part of my work, and the other part of my work is focused on the psychedelic side of things. So I've spent kind of in parallel a lot of time in my postdoc working with the team with Wallace Marshall's lab in biochemistry at UCSF, in biochemistry, biomedical engineering, I think is the department. But we've been trying to understand how psychedelics impact the mitochondria. So there are some really cool pivotal papers out there showing that they do impact the mitochondria in the kidneys and in the brain and in the retina and different cell types. But we don't really have really clear, specific, very granular data at different time points, right? So that we have data from other labs at 24 hours after administration, 72 hours, but we're kind of looking at 6 minutes after and then trying to scale it up. So we're looking at like immediately when you give a psychedelic, what happens to mitochondria. And we're seeing these really crazy structural changes. Mitochondria move around and they do things, and their utilization of oxygen changes. So there's these changes in mitochondrial respiration, and so all these sorts of things. So I'm going to be focusing on a little bit on that. So doing some cell culture work with different psychedelics, trying to understand what they're actually doing. And one of the interesting things that we have found and others have found is that they alter mitochondrial efficiency. It does seem that at least by 24 hours, and it looks like a lot sooner than that, although that data's not been published yet, psychedelics are able to improve mitochondrial metabolic efficiency and energy output and reduce kind of deleterious byproducts like reactive oxygen species. So
So are they acting on? Sorry to interrupt. Are they? So is it suspected that they're acting on the the membrane complex proteins that funnel electrons or protons?
Not well. Yes, probably not directly. Although it's possible there are some weird interactions between serotonin itself, which is structurally similar to psychedelics, and in mitochondria. But that we're not into that yet. But it does seem that downstream of the 5-HT2A receptor, which mediates the psychoactive effects of psychedelics, and animal evidence is showing that it also may mediate a lot of their therapeutic effects in the periphery. For instance, my old mentor at LSU, Chuck Nichols, showed that psychedelics are anti-inflammatory in the lungs and in a lot of different systems, and they modulate all these metabolic factors like glucose concentration and lipid profile. So it seems like they have these systemic transdiagnostic therapeutic effects. And so when they bind to the 5-HT2A receptor, pathways are activated downstream. One of them is called SIRT1. It's a same pathway that's activated by like resveratrol and a lot of these hormetic kind of plant polyphenols and flavonoids and stuff like that. And so there's also another one called antioxidant response elements. So there's these different pathways that are activated by psychedelics downstream of the receptor that directly alter mitochondrial function. And so it's a little bit indirect, but then there's also other ways like calcium signaling downstream of this receptor may alter mitochondria. So there's a lot of different ways. It's not just a direct effect on the complexes, but they do change mitochondrial function, and they can induce mitochondrial biogenesis, which means more complexes and more energy transformation. So there's this complex thing going on there that we're trying to sort out.
And you mentioned that the psychedelics are, you see changes in like the kidneys and so on, or other tissues and organs. How quick do those effects happen?
So it could be very fast. There's evidence from the DMT in dimethyltryptamine, which is in ayahuasca. So there's stroke ischemia models that have been implemented in rats in the brain and in the kidneys, and DMT seems to be protected even acutely. So if you cut off oxygen supply, but you give DMT acutely and then chronically for a few days after that. The acute dose can be psychoactive, but the chronic dosing would be below any sort of subjective threshold, so not even psychedelic. They can basically prevent cell death and improve function longitudinally. So like, inducing a stroke in a rat causes all this brain damage. If you give DMT, there's less damage and the animals recover their motor behavior faster. Same thing with, or a very similar thing with kidney function. And that's been shown with other psychedelics too, like this experimental drug called DOI, which is a different class of psychedelics, but it's also has produced psychedelic effects. So yeah, they happen pretty quickly. Especially when there's a particular injury, but even in healthy organisms, they seem to improve mitochondrial function. Maybe in less than, as quickly as 4 to 6 hours. The data is not published yet, but it's looking like it can happen pretty fast.
Yes, these body-wide effects very quickly.
Well,
wow. It'd be lovely to hear. I don't know if you saw a paper, I think it was a preprint by Nick Lane and someone Rodriguez about Enrique Rodriguez about the biological basis of feelings and consciousness, and they're looking at mitochondria, and they sort of frame it in the fact that anesthetics obviously switch off what we can observe about consciousness. They make us unconscious, and if anesthetics work on membrane potential, they sort of disrupt membrane potential, and it appears that they've got evidence that this is really having a big effect on mitochondria, and propose that the sort of the electromagnetic field that is generated by mitochondria is associated with what we experience as emotion or affect. I'm just sort of thinking about the links with your work and what role do psychedelics, because they obviously have powerful, when they're at appropriate doses, they have big effects on people's affective state and emotional experience as well. So I wonder if they're working not the same way, obviously not, because they're not solvents like some anesthetics, but they seem to have like they don't switch us off, they make us unconscious at most doses, but they're certainly having similar effects.
Yeah, so I have not read the preprint yet, but I'm excited to read it. I met Nick about 13 months ago at the first mitochondrial psychobiology I guess, conference or meeting that Martin Picard put together. And yeah, we talked a little bit about this, and he talked about it with the group. But fascinating perspective, very cool. And there may be some overlap there. There's a investigator, Boris Heifetz, who's awesome at Stanford, who I've worked with a little bit on a chronic pain study with psilocybin. He's looking at parallels between the psychedelic experience and different anesthetics. And so they're stay tuned and look into Boris's work. His stuff's really cool. So I think there might be something to it.
How do you spell that? Is it Boris? Did you say Boris?
Boris, and then HEI FITS or FETS Heifetz. Let's see, Boris Heifetz. Yeah, HEIFETS. That's right. Yeah. Thank
you. Thank you. I'm aware. I'm just conscious of the time, and where can people find out more about your work, especially now that you're about to move? Where should people go to follow you?
So you can find me on Twitter it's just at Sequence My Neuro. It's I was doing a lot of RNA sequencing and came up with that handle. And then LinkedIn, just D. Parker Kelley, and Blue Sky, also at Sequence by Neuro. Those are, where if I have new papers, I usually just post them on all three platforms. And then got some other podcast episodes up on YouTube. You type in D. Parker Kelley. And then I'm hoping to start a TikTok and a Substack. So for short form kind of content, because I have a lot of things I just like to talk about or throw out there into the ether and see what people like. So that will be coming soon. So those platforms work great, and feel free to reach out if anybody has questions or things like that.
Super. I'll add some of those links to the video description, along with the link to the paper that we've discussed. And finally, I know you've said that you're not trying to give medical advice, and you've been very generous sharing your own personal practices. But what would you, for any kind of therapists or healthcare professionals who want to sort of try some practical things that they could suggest either for themselves or for the patients or clients they're working with, where would you suggest they start?
Yeah, great question. So first, I would like to just invite those clinicians to read the paper and like let's work together to help kind of validate and translate this into practice. I'm not a clinician, so I obviously need to work with clinicians to help understand this model better and how it can be implemented, but. So I think that's the kind of first thing is let's figure this out together. But I think the key principles are acute exposure to stressors, right? And stressors that are like genuinely pushing us beyond our capacities. I think that's an important thing to deal with. As long as we're constantly pushing ourselves or patients constantly pushing themselves beyond their capacities, it's going to be really hard to implement real major changes that change the direction of the ship. And so I think that's an important qualifier. But then after that, I think that the key things are like your actual physiological acute energy availability. I mean, the model would predict that if we are pushing ourselves past our capacities frequently and the stress response is not adequate to make energy available, then increasing our ability to transform energy is really important, or our ability to store energy that's easily accessed. So that's why I mentioned creatine earlier. I'm really excited about that. Creatine is like it's basically when you make energy, your body can store it in phosphocreatine temporarily inside of your cells, and then that's just an energy store that's available. It's like a buffer, like a capacitor on a battery, or something like that. So I think that is an interesting thing. I mean, obviously you have kidney issues. There's a lot of qualifications there for whether or not it's appropriate. But that's something I'm excited about, and that's freely available and relatively not dangerous. I think diet, micronutrients are really important. If you're deficient in certain B vitamins and things, it's hard for you to transform energy. And then also, macronutrients, what are you using for your energy sources? I think, sugar is obviously not the best option. So I think, things like that is really important, but then also increasing your energy production capacity through things like exercise. And even growing your largest muscles, your quadriceps and your hamstrings and things like that in your body, it actually produces brain-derived neurotropic factor that goes into your brain and increases it induces growth and plasticity in the brain. So I think the more muscle tissue you have, the better. So I think the more that can occur. So I think exercise is really key. I think psychedelics, we're really interested in this. We're looking at it in Parkinson's right now. A study will come out soon on some kind of mitochondrial biomarkers and after psilocybin treatment in Parkinson's. And then, things like improving your cognitive efficiency, like I mentioned earlier, mindfulness and therapy, like helping people to, work on their kind of internal models of self and world that help us navigate the world. When these models are inefficient or they're not really like well thought through, we waste a lot of energy, right? I think those sorts of things like make my energy available. And then also similarly, our perception of stress and energy availability. So therapy, again, the models that we use, how we're interpreting the world, and how much our interpretation of stress is triggering the stress response unnecessarily. One thing I didn't mention is that not having enough energy is deleterious, but also producing more energy than you can use, right? Activating the stress response when you're laying on the couch because you're anxious. It dumps a ton of glucose into your blood, and then your body's going to spend more energy to get rid of it. And so that's also can dysregulate the system. And then, like I mentioned, psychedelics. Maybe, I don't think psychedelics are going to be like a cure for these things. I think but using the psychedelic experience to kind of give you a window of change and then implementing some of these other things we talked about to be very powerful. And then, like I mentioned before, connection, family, friend support can make us feel like we have more energy and to reduce stress and all these sorts of things. And then the last thing, I hate to say it, but financial support and financial stability, financial responsibility. It's really hard when you're already depressed or you're already struggling to do that. But I think that, the way that our brains work is money is kind of a form of energy. And if we don't have enough money, we're constantly stressed. Our brain kind of interprets that as it has a subjective effect on our affect. And so I think that, it's a hard one because therapy costs money. A lot of things cost money, but getting that straight can be really helpful. So yeah, I think those are the key things. Yeah.
You're very comprehensive there. And I absolutely agree about, what the symbolic, the actual reality of money. If you don't have money, you can't do anything these days. You can't do much these days. That kind of, the beliefs around money, and I mean very real beliefs of, and the power imbalances and struggles that can happen when there's too much inequality or people don't have money. I would totally agree with that. Thank you so much, Dr. Parker, and I'll include those links that you've mentioned, and I certainly will keep my eyes peeled on your future work and follow you more on social media. And I look forward to that TikTok channel as well.
Well, thank you so much, Ian. I really appreciate the invite. It was great talking to you today.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yep, you too. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.